I thought it was only right that Summer join us for this last introduction to the video on topic number 11, the world at work. And I think we'll start out here in just a moment on our topic and questions of the day. So Summer gets to go lay down in her bed now, and Summer says, I bid you adieu. Somebody give him your ears. Summer. No, she's not going to do it today. But Summer bids you hello and is looking forward to the next lesson. Just a moment, please. Hello again. Summer has settled down in her bed for this lecture and may very well be asleep by now. And I hope that you won't be asleep, and we'll follow right along as we begin topic 11. We'll divide it into two parts. We'll do the first parts of the lecture, some questions that we want to consider. As you recall, we always begin with some questions, and that helps us navigate our inquiry for the lesson. And then we'll talk a little bit about worker entitlements. And we're in chapter 8 of our book, A Practical Guide to Ethics, with good old Manning and Stroud, helping us to learn to live and lead with integrity. So let's pull out our outlines and get started on just a few questions to consider here as we start this new chapter and sort of this new unit. We've moved now into the world of work. What sort of ethical issues will we discover there, and at least call upon all our learning so far, all the contents of our ethical toolbox to help us address these issues in the workplace and our obligations and entitlements there. So, A, on our outline, I think these questions come basically from that very first page or so in this chapter, page 169. We want to consider what sort of obligations do we have in choosing the work we're going to do? And what sort of obligations then do we have as workers in those fields? We also are going to talk this time about entitlements we have as workers. In other words, what sort of expectations can we reasonably have as workers and professionals out in the work world? And of course, what would a workplace look like? I think this is a really good question. What would a workplace look like if everyone treated everyone else with integrity? And if we just think back to our last few chapters here about what the utilitarians have taught us, what Kant and Aristotle have taught us, what Confucius and Mencius and the Gita have taught us, we can see that if everybody was living and leading with integrity, our workplaces might be very different in their personality, in their function, and their balance, and really in their success for everyone concerned, not just, if you will, the corporation or the business. And when you have that sort of wide-angle view and that sort of inclusiveness that your employees and your managers and your professionals are all treated with respect, are all operating under that big umbrella of integrity that we've been talking about, then your company is going to reflect that and also gain the prosperity and success that come with living and leading with integrity. And finally, number 5 there on our sheet of questions to consider. What can we all do to create that kind of work environment and make a successful and prosperous corporation, company, and individual as well? Excuse me a moment. So let's dive right into what Manning and Stroud are talking about as our worker entitlements. And one of the focuses I think that'll be good for all of us to think about in lieu of the questions to consider, or actually in keeping with the questions to consider, is what is meaningful work? If we're looking at living and leading with integrity, and most of all the workplace, what does it look like to have a workplace that measures up to integrity, then the work needs to be meaningful. So that'll be our question here today. What is meaningful work? Well, on pages, I think it's, 170, I put my trusty pencil in there. On pages 170 and 171, we have two nifty thought experiments for us to participate in. If you're in the classroom, you can stop and have a little discussion about these. But first, let's all just stop for a moment and look at the two exercises and thought experiments. Here on page 170, we have exercise 8.1. And it says, describe the worst job you have ever had. And then see if you can say why it was such an awful job. And that's a good one. I was thinking most of the time for my jobs, I've enjoyed most of them. And the only time there was kind of a difficulty where I would say, well, this is how it would define my worst job, is if my boss was difficult, or if my boss was not what I would say really in touch with all of us as employees, a boss that didn't reach out. So for the most part, the working conditions and my fellow employees were great, but often the only way I could say it was a bad job, that I didn't enjoy it, is because of the manager or the boss. So for us, as we're going out and learning about ethical issues in the professions in business, this is one of the issues as a boss or a manager in the workplace. How can you make sure TJ doesn't describe you as the reason for the worst job she's ever had? But for you now, take a moment and answer that question and see what you think the characteristics were that made it the worst job you've ever had. Well, now that you've considered the worst job you've ever had, of course we're going to do the flip side of that and say, now, everybody likes this part, although sometimes it's hard to do. That worst job usually pops right up. But this part is, let's now describe your dream job. And then again, what features would your dream job have? And would you describe your oh boy, hold on. It's going to be one of those days. Would you describe your dream job as meaningful work? And we're going to talk about that, but just sketch down if you'd think that would be meaningful. And are you doing this job right now, or are you training for it? And if you're not, jot down some reasons why you're not shooting for your dream job here. So we'll pause the tape for a moment and give some thought to what is your dream job and what are some of the characteristics that make it your dream job. So we'll take a moment here, and I'll be right back. Now, to prep ourselves just a little bit more for our discussion about what is meaningful work, we'll look at also thought experiment, or actually exercise 8.2 then on page 171. Let's have a look at that. What would you be doing if money were no object? What sort of work would you do, and what sort of other things might you do, I guess. But since we're under the part of the world of work here on chapter 8, and that's our topic, think about what would you be doing if money were no object. And then read what Manning and Stroud say there. Okay, like after you've had fun and as they say, caught up on all your sleep, what would you do to make your life purposeful and meaningful? And jot down a little bit about that. And then we'll be all prepped for our discussion about what is meaningful work. So take a moment and do that, and I'll be right back again. Often when we're considering what meaningful work is, or what something is, it's helpful to start with, well, I'm not exactly sure I can name 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 what something is, but I sure know what it's not. So we're going to start by saying, let's look at what meaningful work isn't. And here's a general example. When you have a job, or your work activities do not match your personality, or your talents, or your interests, or your passions, then your work isn't really truly meaningful to you. And that's going to have repercussions as it goes out. also, the reason for that is because we then don't have a sense of purpose in our work, that we're not really contributing to society. And then work just becomes a way to pay the bills, and I've certainly had some jobs like that, and I'm sure everyone has. But so it pays the bills, but it doesn't provide any fulfillment. It doesn't help you on that purpose of life needs that we talked about long ago on the hierarchy of needs. You wouldn't be fulfilling any sense of purpose for yourself if you're really just working a job to pay the bills. And sometimes we have to, and for many years I did. I'm sure y'all have too. But what we're hoping for here is to discuss not necessarily what is, but have some sort of a vision as to how can we express meaning and find purpose in the workplace for everybody, not just the professionals and the managers, but each and every employee, because that's all going to affect the prosperity, the balance, the harmony within any work situation. So now we know, okay, look, this is what meaningful work isn't. It isn't work that doesn't match who we are or our gifts, our talents, so that we can use them. We all want to be able to express ourselves in our work and feel that we're contributing. Recall back to Mr. Hundert's lesson in the Emperor's Club to the students, I think the first day. He has, does he have Martin do it? I think he has Martin do it the first day. Turn around and read the plaque on the back of the wall. We could have the plaque right here on the kiva. This is a kiva fireplace behind me here in my office, and that's a Navajo blanket back there, kind of just covering up the fireplace hole. In the winter it's kind of cold, and so when the fireplace isn't running, I cover it up with a nice Indian blanket. So this is a kiva, and in Pueblo culture, the kiva is the heart of the home. And it also, because it provides warmth, they have kind of an outdoor kiva called an horno, and there they bake their bread and things like this. But here around the kiva is where the kiva area of the home in a Pueblo Indian culture is where the family would gather and spend their time together and share their lives. So anyway, we could have the Mr. Hundert's plaque up there about, let's see, it was in Hunte, I believe, about him being the ruler of Elam and the conqueror of Alif and all those things, but that he wasn't in the history books, you'll recall, because he really didn't make a contribution. He may be a conqueror and someone who was quick to war, but he didn't make positive contributions. His work wasn't meaningful, in other words. So here we go. We've had our thought experiments about what's our worst job and why. What's our dream job and why is that job particularly desirable? Then we've talked a little bit about, well, this is what is not meaningful work, where we don't have a sense of purpose, we don't have a sense of value, we don't have a sense that we're contributing to anything, society, the company, other people. And we're just basically working to pay the bills, but we're not getting any fulfillment. There's no reciprocation. We're just working to get by. And I'm sure we could stop the tape here and talk. You could each think about times that you've done that and times that we may still have to do that, where you do have to work to pay the bills. You do have to work to, just get the basic necessities of life. But we're trying to say, let's see what meaningful work looks like. And that's what we'll move to next here. What meaningful work is. Now we know what it's not. Let's talk about what it is. In your book, Manning and Stroud mentioned a number of things, and I think in a discussion board or in the classroom, if you happen to be in the classroom, it would be a good thing to stop for a moment and discuss what you think it is. And that'll come from your exercise 8.1 a little bit about your dream job. Okay, your dream job's going to say, okay, these things are important and what would make my work meaningful for me, or what does make my work currently meaningful for me. So let's look at a few points, and then you can all add to that in a classroom discussion, or maybe we'll have one up on the D-board for everybody. Meaningful work engages all aspects of our personhood. You'll remember that we've been talking about our intellect, our emotions, and our spiritedness all making a well-balanced person. So when we have work that engages all those things, then we're going to feel it's meaningful. Why? Because I'm involved. I'm engaged in the work I'm doing. I'm not just doing it to get my paycheck. So it's appealing to my personality and my special talents. And so my whole personhood's involved in my work, and I'm going to find meaning in it, guaranteed. So it's work that's going to challenge and develop also. It's challenging, and so my aspects of personhood are going to grow as I interact with people, or as a professional I help people. And so my personhood is going to also be fulfilled also. Aristotle has an idea about an analogy actually about an acorn growing to be an oak. Well, if you stay an acorn the whole time, eventually you're not going to grow, and you just atrophy, or you just become static. But your purpose is to grow to an oak tree if you're an acorn. And so our work, the work of the acorn, helps fulfill that final goal and purpose of being an oak. So our work, if it engages all our personhood, is going to help us go from being an acorn to an oak. And then you bet we're going to find meaning and purpose in that. So that's a first way of thinking what is meaningful work. It also needs to have engaging and interesting work activities. Again, that's going to help you be challenged and develop. If you're just, I don't know, putting sprockets together all the time, this is my job, time after time, that's not going to engage your whole personhood. And it's not enough variety in the work activities to really stimulate you as a worker, as a person. Meaningful work also has safe, healthy, and pleasant working conditions. And of course, I've worked in a variety of places that I guess they were all safe, but some were overly noisy and some were dirty. When I worked at the newspaper, it was a dirty job. I mean, you're talking ink all over the place. So not every workplace has just the basic level of safety involved. But the healthy and pleasant part of working conditions, this is going to take us back to our ethical toolbox and all the things we've studied. A pleasant working condition or work atmosphere or work environment is always going to have at least respect exchanged between other people as a basic foundation. This is what Kant's talking to us about. Aristotle, Confucius, and Mencius too are saying, look, treat people with respect. Remember Confucius's 9 patterns of awareness. Be aware of your character and how that is experienced by others. And Kant, of course, his categorical imperatives are telling us treat one another with respect. Aristotle too, virtuous living, respect is one of the things there we have to consider if we're going to be considered living in that golden mean area between two extremes. Respect is one of those, and respect is a aspect of our personhood that comes from our spiritedness. I don't think, I'm going to think about it, okay, I'm thinking I respect you now, and I don't really feel like I respect you, not like an emotion like sadness or pity. I feel, or I am treating you with respect, person to person, spirit to spirit. What's the saying? Namaste, right? My spirit bows in respect to your spirit, in that we are equals, both having intrinsic value. Another part of a pleasant and healthy, prosperous working atmosphere or environment is that you are treated then as valuable. Not just with respect, but that you have value as a person, certainly, and also as a contributor, remember, to the overall working of the company, so that you're not just some replaceable part in the machinery of the corporation or the company, but that you're valuable in what you, in particular, can contribute in your TJ-ness or your, Summer's gone, Summerness. When she's left the room, I'm sure she's sleeping in one of her other beds, perhaps in the living room. Another part of a healthy and pleasant working atmosphere is that there is some degree of harmony and relation to your fellow workers. Again, see how these all build on our ethical toolbox that we've learned from Kant and Aristotle, Confucius, Mencius, the Gita, all of them, even hearkening way back to the Oh-No rule. But in a healthy working environment, if you think about it, there is this sense of harmony and amongst the people there, and some balance. And lest we think that all the philosophers in the world are men, I will call to your attention here, as we talk about harmony in the workplace, that what we've been talking about when we talk about the three parts of our personhood, that comes from an ancient woman philosopher named Asara of Lucania, and this is her idea that you have these three aspects to your personhood, and you're going to use your head, your intellect more sometimes, depending upon whatever problem is before you. And sometimes you'll listen to your emotions to help you motivate, and other times your spirit will guide you and motivate you to remember, we'll go way back, to determine what the right thing is to do, have a motivation to do that right thing, and then having a proper emotional response so that you don't react but that you respond. And that this comes from, that's our basic foundation from our book for living and leading with integrity. So the basic three parts of that and how they connect with how we're going to try to practice integrity in the world as a person, and certainly in the workplace, comes basically back from a woman philosopher, Asara of Lucania. We certainly want to give credit to Confucius and Mencius and Kant and the utilitarians and Aristotle and Plato and all those gentlemen. But it's also a whole history of women philosophers who are philosophizing and figuring things out for us and suggesting ideas to us all along that time along with the men. So that three-part personhood comes from Asara, and we make our bow to her also of respect. And we finish up with the safe and healthy thing here with a review. It's a good working environment. Okay, hold on. It's a good working environment. Oh, I give up. If you're treated with respect, you're treated as a valuable contributor, as a person, as a unique person, giving a unique contribution, and that there's some degree of harmony in the workplace. And overall then, work should contribute to each person's, what Aristotle and Plato called, the Greeks called eudaimonia. And that's a basic well-being, contentment, and, well, it involves having a good indwelling spirit, that one of the three parts of our personhood. So that each person then can live and begin as an acorn and become an oak, fulfill their potential as a human being. And if you're doing that as a person, then it's going to transfer into the work that you do. And so that's how we're going to draw all those together under that whole environment of good working conditions. Number 4. Whoops, hold on just a second. Sorry about that. I had to look back and see where we were on the outline. So we're on what is meaningful work. And just as a kind of an interlude here, the authors of our book talk about what is an occupation, or I'm sorry, what is a vocation and what is a career. So they're making some distinctions that we made early on when we were talking about the Own-No rule and what is a profession, one of our first questions in class. And here they're going to say, okay, look, we look at it in two different ways. You can, in the workplace, you can have kind of a career, and that's where you start at an entry-level position maybe, and there's an upward path that you can follow so that eventually you can improve your situation and your salary and your work duties. And in other words, there's a sense of promotion. You can be promoted. In a vocation, then, they say, that's different. That's when your work allows you to express your own interests and passions. That's what we've been talking about. Apply your intellect and spiritedness in a creative, constructive way. There's making your contribution. And to do something socially useful. Contributing to others, and something that is also, rewarding to you as a person. That's how you can feel then that your work involves who you are and also offers something not just to a corporation or a company or just to clients, but to society. It's a social good. It's an improvement to society as well, or a potential one. Improvement. Again, you can recall Hundert's first lesson there. Schutruk, was it Schutruk? Schutruk Nahante was not a contributor, and hence he certainly didn't have a vocation. I don't think he had a career because I think he was at the top of the chain there. And he certainly wasn't a professional, so I'm guessing he was just doing a job, huh? Just a joke there. So again, another thought experiment we can do here is consider. Just a second. What we can do. Sorry, I lost my place on the outline again. It must be a day I can't speak or read very well. Anyway, let's harken back to at least the examples I used early on when we were talking about professions and the difference between an occupation and a profession, and see how those measure up and see which ones are careers or vocations or occupations or professions. There's our four choices. So if you recall long ago, one of my examples was I was a short order cook. And while I enjoyed that job greatly, I enjoyed both the people I worked with and the customers that came in regularly. I certainly didn't have a vocation. I really didn't have a way to move up. Being a short order cook was pretty much it. I didn't have a way to be promoted or advance up the, if you will, corporate ladder. So I'm figuring that it certainly wasn't a vocation. While I had fun doing it and enjoyed the people, it really didn't call to my sense of purpose and passion. I mean, it was making food for people and enjoying, but mostly it was a way to pay the bills. A telephone operator, certainly that could have been a career, because you could start, the entry-level position was telephone operator, and I certainly could have moved up the corporate ladder there and ended up some sort of a supervisor or even a vice president or president of the telephone company. So that was mostly a career, not really a vocation. It didn't really challenge me. It was certainly interesting work. I certainly got interesting phone calls from a variety of people and places, but it really wasn't challenging work. It was a good job and paid the bills quite nicely. I also was, as you recall, I am currently your instructor here at Fort Hays State, and that certainly is both a career. I can move up a little bit anyway in the academic realm there, but it's certainly a vocation. Why? Because I can certainly express my own interests and passions here with you as your teacher. I I have and can focus on some of my interests, which are the women philosophers and Asera of Lucania in particular, and show how philosophy really does apply to everyday life, that we can take what these great thinkers have given us and practice them to live a much more prosperous, successful, and well-balanced life. So it's certainly, being your teacher here at Fort Hays lets me express my interests, my passions. I certainly get to apply my intellect and my spiritedness in talking with you all on the D-board, in emailing you, and also in talking with you here in these lessons. And I do feel that I'm doing something socially useful and making a contribution to the just overall well-being of society. And that as we build our ethical toolbox this semester, if each one of you take those out, take your own toolboxes out into the world and practice living and leading with integrity, then we've all done a socially good thing, a socially useful thing. And we should all feel that then we're on that vocational track. Also, I think my work here qualifies as a profession that we talked about earlier, as does my work as a philosophical counselor, especially in that I feel that it's extremely socially useful to help people sort out their problems and untangle their philosophical difficulties. The psychologists certainly do, and psychiatrists certainly help people untangle their psychological struggles. But we all have philosophical ones too, sort of some beliefs we have that maybe don't fit with how we're living and those sorts of entanglements, and people need help with that. And there's a very nice kind of approach that I use, and here's a little interlude. We're going off on a tangent here at the end of this lesson because I think it's very valuable. It's called the PEACE process, P-E-A-C-E, and the process was developed by a great philosophical counselor named Lou Marinoff, and he wrote a very fun book named Plato, Not Prozac. So he's saying sometimes for some problems, of course you need Prozac, but for other things, philosophical problems, maybe a little bit of Plato, maybe a little bit of Kant, maybe a little bit of Confucius, maybe a little bit of Asera of Lucania is really all you need to help you untangle your philosophical struggles. So the PEACE process was designed for that, and I use it in my philosophical counseling practice as a tool to give to everybody to help them look at their particular situation. And I share it with you all now because I think it applies also to situations we can get in the workplace, ethical situations as well. So let's real quickly go through it. The first one is the first P in the word peace, right? And that's basically probe for the problem. Lots of times we think, oh, well, here's the problem. Someone didn't meet their deadline. Susie didn't meet her deadline. But that's not really the problem. That's sort of the symptom. But the problem is, well, we needed to have this work done so that Joe could do his work and Andrea could do her work and June could do her work. So that you need to really zero in on the problem. Just a moment. My light's flashing at me. I'll have to check my battery just a second. Well, it was the battery, so I had to put a new battery in my camera there, and so I'll kind of rewind myself here because I think the tape rewound just a little bit. So rewind. We're on the PEACE process that I think is also valuable when you're thinking about ethical problems. The very first letter is P in the word peace, so that's probe the problem. In other words, get really, really specific about what the problem is, and then you can focus your energies on the rest of the steps in the PEACE process. The next step after the P is E, and that's explore your emotions about it. Lots of times there are feelings people have in the workplace that can kind of undermine a successful work environment. So each person should be encouraged to explore their emotions and express them, not necessarily to everyone else, but to express them in whatever way they're comfortable with. And so that those emotions do not get in the way, so they don't react, but they respond, right? Like we've learned. The A in the word peace is for analyze the alternatives. And this is where it's very good to brainstorm. What are any and all alternatives to help us approach the problem, right? So we've probed the problem, we have a specific problem we're working with, we've examined the emotions about it, and now we're trying to get a list of realistic alternatives or approaches that will help us to solve the problem. That'll bring us then to the C, where we carefully choose and carefully contemplate and then choose amongst those alternatives that we did in the A part of the process. And then the last part of the process is the E, and finishes out the word peace, P-E-A-C-E, and that's you establish an equilibrium then. So you found the problem, you expressed the emotions, you got through those, you listed and brainstormed amongst all yourselves with the alternatives or the approaches to the problem that will work. You contemplated them, you really thought about them, and then you chose which combination or a particular one that you'll go with to solve the problem, and then that establishes an equilibrium. In other words, a balance, right, in the workplace, and you can go on working together again in that nice atmosphere of balance and harmony that Sarah talked about. So anyway, that's a little side gig on how philosophical counseling and philosophy can truly apply to everyday life, whether it's your personal life or, pardon me, your workplace life. In exercise 8.1 and 2, you talked about your dream job and your worst job and what would you be doing if money was no object. Look at those things that you listed earlier and see if you think they are a career, a vocation, an occupation, or a profession, or some combination of those. And have another little thought experiment there so you can get an idea of what your expectations are, what you feel entitled to in your work, and whether or not your idea of a dream job and stuff is in keeping with meaningful work, something where you can express your own interest and personality, something challenging to all three aspects of your personhood that will help you grow from an acorn to an oak and give you a sense of meaning and purpose in your work and as a person. Exercise 8.3, what's going on there? What page is that on? I have no idea. I wish you all were here. You could tell me. Whoops, I'm going to go back. Oh, way back. This is sort of fun, isn't it? 8.3, page 175. Let me note that for the future. Exercise 8.3. Now, something you can think about is how can you make your own working life more meaningful? Now this is going to segue us into our next topic, well, a related topic to this one, in Chapter 8 called Worker Obligations. So are you obligated to make your own working life more meaningful, and what would that look like? And if you are a manager, and I think this is a great question, anybody who supervises anybody, no matter how big your business, no matter how small, if you are a manager, what can you do to make work more meaningful for your staff, for everybody? And all these steps we've talked about, how can you concretely sit down and list them as a manager, help people to be able to express their real selves in their work, feel that they're doing something meaningful, making a social contribution? Do you have a really nice, balanced working atmosphere for your employees? and does what they do every day help them grow from an acorn to an oak, and get that sense of fulfilling their full potential as a human being. Thank you, and I'll be right back. Good afternoon. I've had a nice lunch, and I'm ready now to start Chapter 8, Topic 11, sort of Part 2 of our discussion. And just a moment, I see that I've left my cup of green tea for the afternoon over here. Let me see if I can not unplug myself. Hold on, I'll be right back. Alrighty, I've got the microphone recombobulated and we're ready to go here on topic number 11, part 2. You recall in part 1 that we just finished with, we talked about worker entitlements, sort of expectations we can have to make a prosperous and successful workplace. And so now this afternoon we'll kind of switch our focus, because usually, as we learned in the Oh No rule, with entitlements or with opportunity like that, there often come obligations on the part of the professional as well. And so our question for this afternoon is going to be, at least the first one, I think we'll have 2 today. The first question will be, as workers, then, what obligations do we have? We have certain entitlements, certain expectations we can have that we've talked about at length. Now let's turn our attention to, as workers, do we have, particular obligations that we should fulfill if we're living and leading with integrity in the world of work, which is our topic. One thing to start out with here and remember is that the obligations will be both universal and reversible, in that sense that Kant used those, in that if it's an obligation, it will apply to all human beings in the workplace, and it will also, I must notice that it then is reversible as well and applies to me, that I must abide by it also. So let's look at what some of the obligations might be. Well, I have an obligation to seek meaning in my own daily work. You recall that's an entitlement too, that we have meaningful work. And some of that will involve me seeking meaning in what I do on a daily basis, as well as number 2, which is to seek socially useful work, or at least make the work you're doing as socially useful as possible. So number 1, seek that meaning in your daily work. That we can kind of call right purpose. Number 2, to seek the social usefulness in your work, we'll call right action. Number 3 is acknowledge and fulfill your obligations to, get ready for the list, colleagues, employers, clients, competitors, society, and even, if we get to chapter 10 in the book, the environment in which we live, and to fulfill those obligations to the best of your ability as a professional, as a worker. So the next step, then, that's also right action. So we have right purpose in number 1. In number 2 and 3 we have, I'm thinking about what is the right action I should take. And number 4 is, well, that's a pretty long list in number 3. How is it we're going to fulfill our obligations to all these persons and to the environment itself, which of course supports and gives us life? Well, and I know you saw this coming, it's really everything we've put in our ethical toolbox that we've built through the whole semester. How do you fulfill those obligations? Well, topic 7 told us, with obligations to clients, we have a number of them. Honesty, candor, fairness, loyalty, do no harm, be confidential with the information, be diligent about your work, be competent, keep up with the latest in your field, and we'll call all of those that we learned there right consideration. So we have right purpose, right action, and right consideration. All those obligations we have to clients and customers. We can add Kant's two categorical imperatives in there, in where we have respect for all persons as well as the environment which gives us life. That we'll call right intention. What are my intentions? To respect all persons and the environment as well. The utilitarians also offer us good advice on how to meet our obligations, in that they say, hey, consider the consequences and try to maximize then the positive consequences whenever possible. And if you believe like the Native Americans, recall we're in front of the Pueblo Kiva here in my office, if you believe as they do, you consider the consequences for generations to come, 7 generations to come, actually. Aristotle says, then there's virtuous living that will help you meet your obligations, and where you reflect upon your actions and your character. So you're trying to get right character. Asera of Lucania also says, remember, we're trying to make that harmony within each of us that then can go out into the environment in which we work into our workplace, so that we're trying to have that flourishing of spirit, that good indwelling spirit called eudaimonia. So that's Aristotle and Asera give us ideas about right character, also a way to help us meet our obligations to all these persons as well as the environment. And then our caring and the ancient Eastern perspectives we've looked at give us 2 things to help us out and to put in our toolbox. One being, remember the importance of relationships and trust. That's right relations. And number 2, realize that relationships contribute to who you are and how you choose some of your actions. And that's right connection with others. So now we have a nice list of rights, if you will. Right purpose is number 1. Right action goes with number 2 and number 3. Then we have right consideration, goes with topic 7, our obligations to clients. Right intention from Kant. Right reflection from the utilitarians, right? Reflect upon those consequences. Then virtuous living gives us right character. We get that from Aristotle and Asera. And then from Confucius and Mencius and the Gita, we get both right relations, what sort of relationships we make, and right connection, what sort of connection does that have to us, between us, and then further out into the world. So in trying to meet the obligations we have all those things in our toolbox from topic 7 all the way here to topic 11 to help us out, to help us have right purpose, right action, right consideration, right intention, right reflection, right relation, and right connection. I'm sure there's a rap song in there somewhere. Perhaps one of you will make it and put it up on YouTube and send it to me. You can call it the right rap. Oh boy, now I've got my own juices flowing here, but that's for later. So, after we get done considering our entitlements, which was the earlier lecture today, and our obligations in the workplace, a new question arises, and so we're going to jump over to page 189 in our book, and we're going to consider this question. We're going to say, is it possible to be obligated too much to the company or too much to the corporation? And so we're going to have just a short discussion here on conforming to corporate culture. So let's skip up to page 189. I'm going to have a little sip or 2 of tea, and I'll be right with you. Hold on. As we begin to think a little bit about our question, is it possible to be obligated too much to the corporation or the company? We open our books then to 189, and our authors give us a few suggestions on those, and you might want to think of some examples in addition to those that they're suggesting here. and maybe talk about them in the classroom, or perhaps there will be a D-board about this particular topic. And also, why do those on your list seem to be examples of too much conformity? And I think the authors give us another good question to wonder about and talk about a little bit today. Does too much conformity in the workplace mean that the corporation can, and then perhaps is, treating us as just a means to an end, which of course would certainly violate Kant's sense of right intention on the corporation's part to treat us just as, if you will, replaceable parts in the machinery, or as a means to get, to a certain perhaps monetary or bottom line kind of end, of course would be very hard for us to feel that we're valuable as persons in and of ourselves in the workplace. One of the things our authors mention is that as a worker, we have a need to express, if you will, our individuality. And it's important to the workplace, because otherwise you get something that we often see in governments, which is what they call a yes man or a yes person. If you surround yourselves with people that are just like you, then first of all, there's very little creativity, very little thinking outside of what everybody already thinks, and hence there's not too much sense of, if there's too much conformity, everybody kind of being the same and conforming to think the right way or a certain way, then we have both our worker entitlements kind of in jeopardy, as well as our obligations being we're kind of desensitized to those, I think. So we want to try to remain independent, unique individuals in the workplace so that we can adequately contribute and not just be blind followers. If some of you are reading the book Siddhartha as part of our course this time, then you will be reminded of Govinda being sort of just a follower rather than someone who's thinking for himself. He does have some examples where he makes his own choices, and but for the most part he prefers to follow others' teachings rather than set off on his own quest or journey. Being able to express our individual, boy, I need more tea, just a moment. Our individuality is also important because inquiry and discovery depend upon individual perspectives. Again, it's the yes man or yes woman problem. You don't want just a bunch of people that think just like you, because nothing new really gets introduced into the mix, and it's very hard to get new ideas or creative solutions going if everyone pretty much thinks the same way, or thinks they should just agree with the corporate idea or what the corporation is suggesting. In order for us to fulfill our potential as human beings, of course, we need to express our individuality, as we discussed under worker entitlements. And in order for us to form and accomplish different dreams and goals, even for the corporation itself, we would need to have that diversity and that uniqueness that each of us can bring, and that too much conformity then squashes. So, of course, the idea is one that Aristotle gave us. Let's try to find that golden mean, that balance, and conform to some extent, but to a reasonable level. So you want to say, are there limits to what employers can ask of us as employees? Well, sure, of course. We want to say you shouldn't be able to tell your employees what color hair they ought to have, or something like that, or that they have to change their eye color, things that are sort of involuntary characteristics. And I think there are a number of examples, well, not a number, but a few examples here on page 190. So you might want to take a moment and look at those and think, are these conforming too much to corporate culture, especially in that last paragraph, or that first full paragraph of 190, are those examples of a corporation asking too much conformity from its employees. So also, as we end this particular section of our topic, do you agree with the compromise they suggest, pardon me, they're on 190, and think about why or why not and jot that down. And here's the compromise they're suggesting to that situation on 190. Perhaps one could argue that employers are justified in insisting on conformity to corporate culture if failure to do so would result in direct and immediate harm to serious and legitimate corporate interests. So stop the tape now and think about what you think there. And also, as we end this, I say let's put our thinking cap back on, because we've got a big exercise, number 8.7, coming up, pages 192 to 203. You'll either do that in class, or you'll join me on the D-board for that, I think. So put your thinking caps on and get ready, because here comes an exercise as we wrap up our chapter and our topic on the world of work and our role in the workplace in both the entitlement sense and the obligation sense. And we want to be careful not to conform too much to corporate culture, so much that we lose our individual expression and our individual contribution to both the corporation, society, and the environment as well. So I have enjoyed these lessons with you all. I'm taking off my thinking cap. I hope you keep yours on and enjoy our next, oh boy, who knows what happened there, and enjoy our next exercise, 8.7, on developing a definition of discrimination. And then, of course, how to avoid that particular problematic ethical issue in the workplace. So I bid you adieu, or adieu, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the semester and go forth and live and lead with integrity in the world, sharing the ethical toolbox and all you've learned as you go. Now, and so as our time comes to a close together, also so does my cup of afternoon green tea, and I say goodbye to you all, and I've enjoyed our time together. Thank you, and may fortunate blessings be yours.